Welcome to the Bucher and Friends podcast. Here is your host.
Let's send it over to Rick Bucher.
Rick Bucher.
Welcome to another edition of Bucher Friendless, subsidiary of Bucher and Friends, part of the United WeCast network. I'm Rick Bucher. You can see me on FS1, you can read me on Bleacher Report, and you can follow me on Twitter at Rick Bucher. You can also follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at Bucher Friends. And our producer, John Libby, is always putting out interesting content above and beyond material that involves the podcast. So please check that out. Also, look, if there's a reason you choose to fly privately into the New York metro area, it's to avoid delays. And when flying into NYC, Republic Jet Center in Farmingdale, New York should be your only choice. Don't get caught up in delays flying into Teterboro or White Plains. I know those are the popular ones, but the fact is that the Republic Jet Center is a hidden gem in Farmingdale. It's easy in and out of the city, and they've done a tremendous amount of upgrades there. You'll experience all the reasons why you chose to fly privately. RJC is a proud part of the Signature Flight Support Network, and getting to the city is as quick as a 12-minute helicopter ride, which they have available. They also have a luxurious lobby. It's a new 100,000 square foot facility, self-serve snacks, beverages, all of that, contemporary lounge, plush seating, flat screen, you name it. They even have a concierge who will gladly help you with accommodations, ground transportation, whatever you need. It's white glove FBO services, and premier affiliations are the compelling reason why aircraft owners and operators benefit from selecting RJC. So they look forward to seeing you at their facility on the next visit. Mention this ad on Bucher and Friends, and you will get a price reduction of $1 per gallon, I'm assuming, on the fuel. But anyway, you'll get a discount. So check that out. And you can visit at www.republicjetcenter.com, or you can call them at 631-881-9520 for more information. All right. Today's podcast was released late, very late, for a couple of reasons. The first is that I went to Game 2 of the Rockets-Warriors series with a Bay Area basketball coaching legend, Doc Shepler, as part of a story I'm working on for Bleacher Report. As it turns out, Steph Curry, with the Warriors moving to San Francisco, is looking for a new home closer to the new arena, and he happens to be interested in one just around the corner from where Doc lives. Now, the house that Steph is looking at was actually built by the same builder as the one that built Doc's. And all of that inspired a conversation in the locker room between Doc and Steph after the game about the house and the neighborhood and some mutual friends that they have. And it once more reminded me of just how approachable and personable Steph is. I mean, there he is. He's standing there with the dislocated finger that he suffered in the game, still wrapped. And, Doc isn't a total stranger because they have some mutual friends. And Steph has heard of what a great coach he is through people close to him. But they chatted like old friends catching up. I mean, under the circumstances, you hear about the pressure of the playoffs and everything that the Warriors are going through, and none of that was evident in seeing Steph chatted up with Doc. So in any case, all that resulted in me not crafting this pod the night before its release, as I usually do. Not that I'm complaining. The other reason it's late is that I had hoped, as I advertised in the last podcast, that this episode might be one of the conversations I had with the Pistons' Blake Griffin while I was working on a story about how, contrary to what everyone expected, he has embraced his move from LA to Detroit and actually flourished in a way he never did or could with the Clippers. And because our conversations were recorded for the sake of writing a story and not publishing them as a podcast per se, I want Blake's approval before I use them in that manner. I didn't surreptitiously record our conversations or anything like that, but at the time, I wasn't thinking they'd become part of a podcast either. So after writing the story, though, I realized there were a number of topics we talked about that I just couldn't fit into the story, and there were so many readers who responded by saying they appreciated how it gave them a deeper understanding of who Blake is. And I feel like the recorded conversations will do the same, especially hearing Blake's words in Blake's own voice. But getting Blake's approval to put our conversations out just seems like the right thing to do. So that's what I'm doing. He has the clips now, and or at least the ones that I'd like to use, and he has said he'll listen to them and get back to me. So as soon as he does, with a yes, I'll share them with you. Another doc wrote me the other day via Twitter about media coverage in general and reports about the Lakers in particular. Now, based on his Twitter profile, this is not somebody I know. He is an orthopedic surgeon in the Philippines and a huge Lakers fan. That is why, as an aside, one of the great redeeming aspects of Twitter that I can be reminded of just how far my work travels and that I get the perspective of an orthopedic surgeon and Lakers fan halfway around the world. That's one of the great redeeming aspects of Twitter. Or that I'm simply made aware that there is an orthopedic surgeon who is a huge Lakers fan living in the Philippines. Anyway, he was making what I considered the generous point that the blurred lines between rumors and speculation and opinion and facts makes it harder than ever for the most conscientious and reliable reporters to maintain the trust of fans because of conflicting stories on what is true or not true. And I assume that he sent me that tweet because he directed it both to me and ESPN's Dave McMenamin. And I assume that's because of our recent reports on things going on in Lakerland. And mine obviously had to do with Magic Johnson seeing some critical emails that were exchanged between GM Rob Pelinka and owner Jeannie Buss, and the indication that those emails are what prompted Magic to abruptly resign and reference backstabbing as one of the reasons he was doing so. Now, apparently a couple writers from The Athletic, I don't know if they've reported it, I saw it referenced, that they're basically knocking down my report, saying that they've heard from a source knowledgeable of the situation that it was not true. And that was picked up by a Lakers blog, and which also jumped in refuting what I shared on FS1. McMenamin reported that the Lakers have work to do in repairing their relationship with LeBron James, which prompted LeBron to put out a video from the Lakers' weight room of him showing the report on a TV screen and then singing, "It's not true." I don't know about McMenamin, but I stand by my report. I've heard from a couple people in and around the organization who have denied my story. In the same way, I mean, they may have even been the same people that talked to The Athletic. But I also know that they have a vested interest in knocking it down. And I have no history with them as sources. I do have a history with the source who told me why Magic stepped down when and the way he did. So I'm going to roll with that source. Now, I told that story about the emails on FS1, my new TV gig. And it was prompted by the host, Colin Cowherd, saying that I'd heard something about why Magic left the Lakers. Could I share that? And so I did. That clip, not surprisingly, went viral, and at least on social media was presented as Rick Bucher is reporting. Now, I bring all this up because it feeds into what my orthopedic surgeon from the Philippines brought up, which is, the various new mediums have created a challenge for both people like me reporting information or dispensing information. And the word reporting has a connotation, and we'll get into that. But anyway, it's a challenge for people like me who are in the business and people like my orthopedic surgeon who are consuming it. And in my days, I'll be honest, in my days as a newspaper reporter, one source would not have been enough for me to warrant reporting that Magic stepped down because of some disparaging emails. Would not have happened. I would have had to do a lot more digging. I would have had to gather a lot more verification, and I would have had to have at least one of the principals involved in the exchange, Magic, Jeannie, or Rob, respond to the story. Now, those rules no longer exist, even within the most august mainstream media outlets. I don't know that newspapers in this day and age are holding holding fast to what we call 2 red checks in terms of sourcing stories. But this wasn't that. And look, this is my interpretation, and maybe this is not fair because fans have a different interpretation, but this was not me reporting. This was me having a conversation with Colin about what I had heard. That's how he framed the question, and that's how I answered it. And now I wouldn't have shared it if I didn't believe my source, but do I know without reservation that it happened on the level that I would when I was reporting a story for a newspaper? No, I don't. I'd have to have copies of one of the emails, to be honest, to feel that way. Or have both, like Jeannie and Rob, or Rob and Magic, or I'd have to have serious confirmation. The same applies to the reporting around Kevin Durant's future. Now, I spent the last week around the Warriors. I went to Game 6 against the Clippers down in LA. I attended both Games 1 and 2 against the Rockets. And when you've been covering the league as long as I have, you run across all sorts of people with various connections in basketball. And I wasn't really cognizant of that until Game 2, and I had Doc with me, and I had to introduce him. I didn't introduce him to everybody whose path I crossed, but a number of them. And it made me realize just how many people, when I go to a game, I have contact with. I probably talk to, conservatively, 20, 25 people. Players, GMs, assistant coaches, media, you name it. So with all that, you hear a lot of things. You also get pretty well versed in reading, whether it's a locker room or body language or exchanges that you see but don't always hear clearly. You may see them from across the court or across the locker room or wherever. So in my time around the Warriors just the last week, I've heard a bunch of things, all of which continue to feed into my belief that Kevin Durant is going to the Knicks. And I've said it. I've said it before. I'll say it again. Haven't heard that from KD. Haven't heard it from his manager, Rich Kleiman. But I have heard it from other people that are involved with KD and Rich. And over the last week, heard it from people inside the Warriors organization that that's what they are expecting to happen. Do they know definitively? Have they been told definitively? Didn't get that. Do they expect it to happen? I mean, I was even told Joe Lacob, the Warriors principal owner, has told friends that he plays with in a regular pickup run at Stanford, his alma mater, that KD is as good as gone. Now, see, this is where it gets interesting, because when you get the details of who he told and where he said it, it adds to the legitimacy of it. To just hear that someone said it is one thing. Where and how, that makes all the sense in the world. Again, wouldn't go on that one report, but it was one more little piece. I also witnessed what was an awkward handshake between Lacob and KD after the Game 1 win. Lacob often comes in the locker room after games, and if somebody has had a particularly good game, he'll come over and shake hands and congratulate them. And he stepped in, and from where he walked in to the locker room, there's a little cooler there, a stand-up fridge, and then KD's locker in the corner. And he stepped in, he kind of almost ran into KD, and then stuck his hand out, and they shook hands. But it was just, Lacob had this forced smile, and he was kind of caught off guard, and it was very brief, and they looked very stiff in doing it. I've seen him with Steph, I've seen him with other guys. There was no warmth in this. I mean, I don't want to read too much into it, but it was different. And then after Lacob walked away, KD and the reporter he was talking to shared a laugh. Now, maybe it had nothing to do with the exchange he had just had with Lacob. Maybe it did. But if the scene lent credence to one side of the speculation that KD is leaving or KD is staying, it would be the former. I've also noticed over the last week that KD spends far more time talking one-on-one to various reporters than he does to any of his teammates. Now, that wasn't the case last year. Draymond Green and Durant in particular, their lockers are separated only by Quinn Cooks. They were always hobnobbing and going out afterward or saying, hey, I'll see you later. And I haven't seen that once this year. Now, these are observations, pieces of information that I feel free in sharing on a sports talk show, be it on TV or radio or on a podcast. I will tell you right now, I have a different standard in those circumstances than I do for the printed or typed word. I'm not going to throw something out there that's just titillating. I'm not going to do that. I have to believe that my source is on to something. But am I going to, double source it, red check it? I just have a different standard for the printed or typed word. And then maybe it's the writer in me, but a written story with a byline where the whole purpose of the story is to report a piece of information is more official to me than any of the other forums I work in. And I'd have to go back through my written archives to tell you the last time I wrote a story expressly for that purpose. Bleacher Report does not ask nor expects me to write those kind of stories. So that brings me to a piece of news, verifiable and all, that means far more to me than any of you. And that's the shuttering of ESPN The Magazine, my former employee, and the base from which I can say, whatever I am today in the business, it was launched by ESPN The Magazine. I was in newspapers before that, got to the Washington Post. Washington Post was my gateway to ESPN, but ESPN The Magazine was my gateway into ESPN and becoming proficient and in multiple mediums and establishing whatever national reputation I have now in covering the NBA. A framed cover of the first issue with my name on the masthead, and that's the narrow column near the front of an issue where all those who are on a magazine staff are listed under their various departments. I'm sure most of you have never looked at that very closely. I would look at the one in Sports Illustrated all the time. I was aware of when guys moved up from staff writer to senior writer, or, the pecking order was reporters, staff writers, senior writers. Senior writers was the top of the heap. That was the Frank DeFords and the Dan Jenkins, legendary names for me growing up. And the idea that one day I would have my name on a masthead as a senior writer was really, it was a dream. And with ESPN The Magazine, when you joined, they gave you a framed copy of your first issue. I have it. It's on the wall of the guest room in my house. October 19th, 1998 is the issue date. Randy Moss is on the cover. He's wearing shoulder pads and eye black, but otherwise bare-chested. That was kind of a thing with ESPN The Magazine there for a while, and then evolved into the body issue. But we were big on on putting guys. We did Kevin. One of my other stories, we painted Kevin Garnett blue and put him bare-chested on the cover. In any event, Randy Moss is on the cover. The headline is, "Catch This, 19 teams passed up Randy Moss, and he's going to make them all pay." And I am listed as a senior writer along with John Clayton, Tom Friend, Curry Kirkpatrick, Tim Kirkjian, and the original Woj, Gene Wojciechowski. Now, those were all legendary writers in my mind already. Kirkjian and Kirkpatrick were among those that I read in Sports Illustrated. John Clayton was already established as a tremendous NFL reporter. And Tom Friend was the first writer I envied from afar and hoped to emulate or compete against, because he had landed the Kansas City Kings beat straight out of college when the Sacramento Kings were still in Kansas City. Dream job for a guy who's 23. So, for someone who grew up reading Sports Illustrated, being a senior writer for a national sports magazine, becoming a senior writer for a national sports magazine was a dream fulfilled. I had initially planned on becoming a lawyer to justify the expense of my Ivy League education and as the first and only person in my family to go to college. But then I landed an internship with Sports Illustrated my junior summer in school, and I couldn't imagine a more cool job than flying around the country, writing the kind of stories on the biggest events and biggest names that I devoured days after the actual event happened or the subject traversed some big stage in Sports Illustrated. They always had behind the scenes information and settings and conversations that you didn't find anyplace else. Felt like they were taking you inside. Made you feel like you were there and you experienced it on some personal level. They were stories that gave me deeper insight into what transpired, more so than the immediate news reports, and they were stories whose writing transformed the event or the subject into something grand and singular, and that's what I wanted to do. Or at least I wanted to find out if I could. ESPN The Magazine gave me that chance. I ended up going all around the world on assignments. China, South Africa, Germany, Serbia, as well as all around the country. Puerto Rico, Hawaii, even a little Missouri town 60 miles more remote than the original Little House on the Prairie to do a story on John Neednagel, the brain doctor that was once in the employ of Danny Ainge and the Celtics. The editing staff of the magazine at the time was chock full of legendary Sports Illustrated alums. John Papanak, Steve Wolf, Gary Honig. We were a supercharged version of SI. And rather than looking back, our motto was next. As in, we're going to tell you the big stories before they happen so that when you watch an event, you'll already be informed of the backstory that I relished reading after the fact. Now, I was originally hired simply to write an NBA notes column for the magazine, to be the Peter Gammons of baseball or the Jackie McMullen of basketball. And I was hired 6 months after the magazine launched, and the NBA at the time happened to be in a lockout. And so they brought me to New York to sit down with all the editors, and we were throwing around ideas. And I mentioned that the Pacers players were holding their own training camp out of respect for, and maybe some fear of, Larry Bird, who was in his second year as a head coach. And the editors asked if I thought I could get in to see them practice if I went to Indy. And I said I'd try. And they said, go. So I did get in, and I watched a team running gassers. I mean, these guys were going full tilt on their own. And I found out that Larry had talked to them prior to the lockout when there could still be communication between players and personnel, and told them, look, you guys might have to, do something on your own to keep this together. And I met in their prime Mark Jackson, Reggie Miller, a rookie, Al Harrington, and I wrote a feature on what I saw, and now I was in one story, with one pitch, I was now a full-time feature writer and charged with, voila, flying around the country, writing about the biggest names and biggest events. Now, ESPN being ESPN, of course, I ended up on TV, radio, and eventually splitting my time between writing and those other mediums. And the exposure of TV eventually dwarfed my work as a writer, even though I was as prolific. Throughout those 14 years, I was always prolific when it came to the magazine. The magazine and going out and doing magazine stories is what informed me and allowed me to be as informative as I could on radio and TV. I have often said when I was, did more and more TV, that when I was in Bristol for 4 or 5 day stretches, I had the most exposure when I knew the least. You have to be out there. You have to be seeing people and games and things in person. The phone, you can build a phone list and you can get a lot done that way, but it's not everything, especially if you're writing. So the exposure of TV eventually, made people think that I was more of a TV person than a writer, but I embraced them both. I kind of thought of myself as a storyteller after a time because I needed to work at being good at TV. I didn't want to just be a writer on TV. You know who those are. And I thought that was not doing justice to the job itself. And look, don't get me wrong. I love the chance to be on TV. I think it's a weird industry. I think if people aren't weird getting into it, it can make them weird because the celebrity or the suggestion that you know something or you are somebody just because you're on TV can be intoxicating. And I've always been leery of that and people who give into that, but I've seen it. And look, that's their choice. I'm not saying right or wrong. It just makes me a little leery. That's all. And look, what I love about being on TV is that it's as close as you can get in this business to being in a game. I mean, I love competing. I love being challenged to think on my feet. And that's what TV does. Even studio is not quite the same as the most challenging job I've ever had is as a sideline reporter for live games. That, without question, is the biggest challenge. Now, I knew that when the magazine offices moved from New York to Bristol, Connecticut, which was, 2 or 3 years before I left, that it would never be the same. And that it was really only a matter of time at that point before it went away. Now there were, once we made that move, and it might have even happened right before, but now you were getting high-profile names on TV that were taking up space in the magazine. I think primarily because they were high-profile names on TV, not because their content was notable. At least that was my opinion. But because they were recognizable personalities. They thought it would help sell the magazine. But what it told me was that the trust in storytelling being enough to sell the mag was dissipating. When we were in New York, we were a satellite of ESPN. We drew from its powerful reach. It helped us, but we had a spirit that was defined by finding the next best story, not necessarily stories about the biggest names. We were looking for next, as the motto said. ESPN all too often now feels as if it looks for certain, as in this subject is certain to generate attention. The mag took the approach of telling you what you should get excited or care about. Now it's what ESPN knows you're going to get excited or care about. And look, I don't know that Bleacher Report is all that different. I can't think of a major sports outlet that is. It is about staying in business and making money to keep the lights on. So I get it. I'm not going to be one of those old crusty guys who says, yeah, if they'd only do it the old way, the old ways go away. But I can feel a little remorseful and mourn that something is gone that was a great thing and a treat for me as a reader as much as a writer. So in all, I'm grateful that my 14 years with the mag came when they did, which was within its first 14 and a half years. I wouldn't be who I am today without it. The people I worked with, the experiences I had, the relationships I built, the writing and reporting muscles I developed. If I came up with an idea for a story, they more often than not gave me the resources to pursue it. I still have every issue that contains my byline, and there were many issues that I had more than one because it wasn't work. They were not only allowing me to do something I loved, they were covering the cost and paying me on top of it. Now, I thought about digitalizing all those issues to save space because they take up a considerable amount of space. We're talking 14 years. But I haven't come to terms with throwing away the hard copies just yet. And I didn't have any qualms about doing that with video clips of my TV work. And I'm not a pack rat by any means, nor a collector of memorabilia. But this feels like something a little deeper. It's history. My history. I stayed in touch with a few people from the mag after I left ESPN because I wanted to know how they and the mag were doing. And there was a looming sense of apprehension. But faith was put in John Skipper, the former head of ESPN, because he was always telling people that the mag would be around as long as he was in charge. Then when he left, we all figured, or at least I did, that it was going to be just a matter of time. I mean, at some point it was going to go. I guess what bothered me the most when I saw the tweet by John Orand of the Sports Business Journal about the magazine's demise is that he referred to it as a money-losing publication. And maybe it was by the time it went away, but it wasn't for the last 12 years that I was there. And I'm not taking credit for that. I'm just saying it wasn't for the great width of time that I was there. It took about a year or two to become profitable, which is still a very short runway by normal industry standards. And no doubt, thanks to the power of displaying covers routinely on SportsCenter in those days. I mean, that was one of those little perks as a writer. And this was before I was on TV a lot myself. If you saw your cover story and it was mentioned by Scott Van Pelt or Stuart Scott, that was a great perk as a writer. But in any event, it more than paid for itself in those days. I mean, it was making millions above and beyond the costs. I don't know if there was a way that the mag could have continued to be profitable if it indeed is no longer or was no longer. Look, writing in print and writing in general do not enjoy the popularity they once did. But I do know that what made it unique and successful was abandoned. Whatever they killed off was ESPN The Magazine in name only. It wasn't the magazine that hired me. Now, students and fledgling reporters ask me now and then, how I got to where I am. And I usually tell them, pretty quickly, the path that I took doesn't exist anymore. And I largely did that because I began in newspapers and everybody needs a starting point. And I don't know that newspapers have the same cachet that they did. But with the magazine going away, I feel as if I'm in one of those adventure movies, where you're standing on the edge and you watch the ground behind you fall away. Obviously, I have no choice but to go forward or to leap, and I'm okay with that. But I guess I wanted to take this time to just make a point of sharing how much that I will always treasure my time at ESPN The Magazine. I've got some swag with ESPN The Magazine on it, and since I left ESPN, I've never worn it. And some of it, a lot of it, I've given away. I just can't imagine that I'll have reason to wear it again. But now that the magazine's gone away, I suddenly look at it a little bit different. This is one instance where I may have to keep a little memorabilia. Because if it didn't, the magazine that is, if it didn't make me who I am as a professional, it certainly allowed me to make myself. And as I said, for that, I will always be grateful. And a little sad now that it's gone. All right. That does it for this edition of Bucher Friendless. In our next podcast, Ryan and Hollins will join me, and we will break down whether the Rockets still have a chance of making this a series down 2-0, who we like in the Nuggets-Blazers series, and what to expect from the Eastern Conference battles. In the meantime, as always, thanks for listening.